it's very unusual to have a situation where we have where I'm not talking about naming a bridge, I'm talking about a bill that has some controversy and some consequence in people's lives. And it's very unusual to have a situation where we've had no hearings on this bill, and there's no one here who can answer any questions on this bill. In other words, there's nothing. If I have some questions, and I'm going to go through some of the questions I have, there's no effort made on the part of people supporting this legislation to provide any answers to these questions, which again, on almost any other bill, even non-controversial bills, there's someone there who's prepared to answer questions and introduce the bill. We've had hearing or a couple of hearings on the bill. In other words, there's been some discussion and people have had the opportunity to figure out what the bill actually said. Let me give you an example. One of the things the bill does is it provides an exception to the prohibitions contained therein for anything that, and I want to get the wording exactly right, causes irreversible impairment of a major bodily function of a woman. Now, I asked what that meant last year, and last session, because we discussed this bill last session too. No one could answer that question. After a couple of years to get the act together, there's still no one apparently prepared to answer that question. What is the major bodily function of a woman? Does that include her ability to reproduce in the future? What does that mean? Another question I have, since this, again, has been pointed out by Senator Boscola and others, is that we are starting to get, as legislators with no medical training, we are starting to get into the operating room and determining specifically what procedures in the operating room we should use. There is no discussion. There's, for example, this bill bans the D&E method of abortion. I would like to know what is the alternative method that the prime sponsor of the bill and the people supporting this bill prefer. What method do they want used if it's not the D&E? And I say that because according to the medical literature I have read, the D&E is the safest procedure for the woman. So is there a procedure that they prefer, that they have some information and can demonstrate that this is equally safe or safer for women? And why would they not want to give women the option of the procedure that is safest for them? Any one of us was going in for surgery, we would want whatever statistically was the safest option for the type of surgery. Here, we're banning a specific method with no discussion in the bill of what the alternative should be, no hearings to flesh out what the alternatives would be, no opportunity for people to testify, well, this is safer, this is not safer, this is the way, nothing, which again is really odd. Now, with regard to the constitutionality of this, I respect the chairman's position, but I disagree with it. I don't think we just pass bills and send them to the Supreme Court and hope for the best. I think we took an oath, all of us, individually, to have our own independent views on constitutionality. We took an oath to protect the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania and the United States. We are not supposed to be passing bills that we know to be unconstitutional on the hope that maybe the Supreme Court will change their mind or something like that. That is not what our oath says. Here, the Supreme Court has been pretty clear recently, not 29 years ago or whatever, just in the last year, in Whole Woman's Health, where the Supreme Court discussed trap legislation designed to make it harder for women to get abortions. The Supreme Court struck those down, saying that the state has a legitimate interest in ensuring maximum safety for the woman. They cannot pass legislation which undermines the safety of the woman or undermines or impedes her choice. That is impermissible. That is what they said in striking down the Texas law. This does exactly what the Supreme Court just said we can't do. Now, we are not doctors here. Again, it's been pointed out, we should not be deciding the specifics of surgical procedures. It's beyond crazy. And, you know, I noticed that probably, at least in this committee, certainly, all the votes for this bill are going to be a bunch of middle-aged men telling women what they can and can't do with their own bodies. I'd suggest at the very least, the optics of that are bad. That, you know, we ought to consider a more thoughtful approach. Let's hear from some women. Let's hear from some doctors. Let's hear from some scientists. And let's hear from whoever else people want to call as a witness. But let's understand what we're voting on before we start becoming surgeons ourselves, and before we start substituting our medical decisions for the medical decisions of doctors, and our moral decisions for the moral decisions of the people involved. And I just regret that we don't have the opportunity to get any information whatsoever about what this bill does, in contravention of almost any other committee vote that I've ever taken on a substantial piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.